A history of honor, a future of glory. Since the distant time when mankind knew only one sky and one sun, soldiers of the proud units that became the Northwind Highlanders have won brilliant victories against often desperate odds. From small-scale uprisings in ancient Scotland to epic struggles between mighty star empires over countless worlds, the Northwind Highlanders of every generation have added to their forebears' battlefield glory. Fiercely proud warriors, the Highlanders have left their legendary mark on the universe, and will do so as long as war rages in the Inner Sphere. Of the litany of mercenary units across the Inner Sphere, periphery, and the history of human conflict, no military unit can trace their existence as far back into that history as the Northwind Highlanders. For more than 1,600 years, Highlanders have protected lands, nobles, monarchies, and republics. They've done so with honor and dignity in the face of tremendous hardship, and come out on the other side as a pillar of civilization among chaotic forces. Though their presence would ebb and flow over the years, when humanity began to spread out across the stars, the remnants of the Highlander regiments left Earth to start again on fertile, untouched soil. At first, simple settlements were constructed on their chosen planet named Northwind. Those then grew into bustling towns and cities, and the Highlanders' mark of civilization could be found across Northwind's surface. Because humanity did not leave their habit of starting conflicts behind, the Highlanders found themselves needing to protect what they were building. The years 2362 through 2364 saw the formations of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Kearney Highlanders. These units were made up from volunteers who could trace their ancestry back to the original Scottish Highlanders on Terra. Eventually, 3 more regiments were formed during the later years of the 24th century. As it turned out, the creation of these units to defend Northwind could not have been undertaken at a better time. As the settled planets and fiefdoms that would eventually make up the Inner Sphere descended into what would later be called the Age of War, the 6 established Highlander regiments became mercenaries. Quite successful and savvy with their contract choices, the Highlander regiments made a name for themselves across many battlefields. As the conflicts began to peter out and the Star League was formed, the Highlanders retained their status as a premier mercenary unit. When the first Lord of the Star League announced the creation of a unit called the Royal Black Watch, many of the Highlanders and the citizens of Northwind were surprised. Many thought that they were alone in preserving the traditions and familial lines of distant Scotland. However, this was not the case. The Royal Black Watch Regiment became one of the SLDF's most elite units. This was partially due to the many Northwinders who joined its ranks to serve. The Highlanders and the Black Watch built strong connections and reforged bonds that went back centuries. Though the Highlanders continued to operate as mercenaries, often under contract with the Capellans, there was a frequent overlap with the Black Watch, and the Highlanders exchanged information and even warriors. However, all was not well within the Highlanders, as the mercenary regiments, who spent a great deal of time away from Northwind, started to more frequently come into conflict with the clan elders who controlled the political system back on Northwind. When the Capellans tendered the offer to formally induct Northwind into their domain, a schism formed which could not be patched. The elders valued their independence and did not want to be swallowed up in the Capellan state. The Highlander mercenary regiments saw joining the Capellans as a great way to make vast amounts of money and further bolster the Highlander reputation. Northwind did not end up joining the Capellans, but the Highlanders did by signing an extensive contract for continued service to the Capellan state. Northwind saw the worst from this break, as the collapse of the SLDF and the Terran hegemony would see the planet become a frequent battlefield during the Succession Wars. Though the SLDF Black Watch was no more, the Highlanders kept the memory and practices of the unit alive within their ranks, as so many of its warriors had spent time serving under that banner. Though some of the Highlanders would return to Northwind during the course of the First Succession War, it wasn't enough to prevent the Federated Sons from running roughshod over the planet in 2841. The 3rd Kearney Highlanders and Stuart's Highlanders fought until the bitter end in defense of Northwind, but it wasn't enough to prevent the planet from being taken by the AFFS. This conquest would create a long-running bad blood between the Federated Sons and the Highlanders. Now officially homeless and in exile, the remaining Highlander regiments continued to take mercenary contracts throughout the Second Succession War and the beginning of the Third. Even though the Capellans promised that they would eventually provide assistance in reclaiming Northwind, that day did not arrive. During the Fourth Succession War, the frustration reached a boiling point. The Highlander regiments saw that the Capellans were not interested in the Highlanders as anything other than a merc company that could be tossed against the Federated Sons. Secret negotiations were held between the Highlanders and the representative of Prince Hans Davion, and in November 3028 the Northwind Agreement went into effect. Under the terms of this agreement, the 4 remaining Northwind Highlander regiments would swear loyalty to the Federated Sons, cut all ties with the Capellans, and establish a working relationship with the AFFS, and, most importantly, they would return home to Northwind. When they arrived in the Northwind system, the planet's forces were embroiled in combat with the Draconis Combine. That conflict came to a swift resolution as the 4 regiments landed in their dropships and drastically shifted the balance of power toward the planet's defenders. After a long, self-imposed, then actual exile, the Highlander regiments were home. In a moving ceremony, each of the regimental commanders returned their ceremonial claymore to a wall-mounted scabbard which still held the 2 swords from the 3rd Kearney and Stuart's Highlanders regiments who were destroyed in the Succession War invasion. For the remainder of the 4th Succession War, the Northwind Highlanders were not stationed far from home. Northwind's location in the Terran Corridor meant it was a strategically valuable position for the Federated Sons to keep a powerful mercenary unit there and in control of the surrounding systems. Even during the War of 3039, the Highlanders were left to garrison their region rather than being deployed in the FedCom war against the Draconis Combine. When the clans invaded in 3049, the Highlanders were not sent to fight them initially. Yet again, it was determined that they were too useful where they were to take the risk sending them far from Northwind. That Terran corridor of systems was simply too valuable. Only after the Truce of Tukid did the Federated Commonwealth call upon the Highlanders to shift forces toward the border with the clans. Though this was supposed to be a temporary arrangement until the Federated Commonwealth could replace and reinforce their units, the Highlanders were hammered by clan raiding, which significantly degraded their combat effectiveness. Many Highlanders were killed and the units were decimated. Stirling's Fusiliers were cut down to the point where they could only field a single battalion by July of 3054. Through experience and sheer force of will, the Highlanders gradually rebuilt their forces and learned tactics which would significantly improve their performance against clan raiding parties. The temporary duty on the border with the clans continued through 3057, with no end in sight. Tension with the Federated Sons grew as the Highlanders were resisting the increasingly obvious pressure to wrap the Highlanders into the FedCom regular army. In 3056, the Highlanders were brought in to relieve the Grey Death Legion on Glengarry, which ended up being a bloodbath which claimed good warriors and significantly reduced the unit's fighting strength. Insult was added to injury when the Federated Commonwealth tried to gouge the Highlanders by offering replacement parts and machinery at 3 times the going rate. Highlander leadership was fed up with their treatment, and by the end of 3057 they used the deteriorating political environment of the Federated Commonwealth to recall their forces to Northwind. House Davion was not happy with this breach of orders and contract, but as they were rapidly heading into a civil war and dealing with invasions from other houses, there was little that could be done to stop the Highlanders. The Davion forces that were sent to Northwind to crush the regiment stationed there before the others arrived were met by Colonel William MacLeod, as well as a contingent of death commandos sent by the Capellans to deprive the Davions of both Northwind and the future services of the Highlanders. MacLeod's regiment fought tenaciously and was able to hold on to control of the planet for long enough for the other Highlanders to return in reinforcement. Northwind declared their independence from any of the major houses and took stock in the forces they had remaining after that last tumultuous decade. In an unlikely turn of events, the next major contract the Highlanders would take was with the Draconis Combine. The daughter of the Combine's coordinator personally delivered a Highlander standard taken in battle by the DCMS years before, along with a lucrative offer to hit a Clan Smoke Jaguar supply garrison in the deep periphery. Once again, the Highlanders were being called to fight far from home. Under the leadership of Major Lauren Jaffray, the Highlanders discovered that the mission was anything but a cakewalk, as there was an entire Smoke Jaguar galaxy stationed on Wayside 5. With the use of savvy tactics and subterfuge, Major Jaffray was able to lure the Smoke Jaguars and Nova Cats into direct conflict, sparing the Highlanders from almost certain destruction. Battered but victorious, the Highlanders returned to Northwind. At this point, a new regiment was formed with the express purpose of specializing in anti-clan warfare and equipped with a large amount of salvaged clan technology. Lauren Jaffray, now quite skillful in such conflict, was chosen to lead it. With the news of the reborn Star League, the Highlanders and the Blackwatch units within them faced a tough decision. Some wanted to present the new First Lord with a Black Watch unit that would serve, as it always had, as the Lord's personal guard. Others thought that the Black Watch should prove themselves before seeking their place at the First Lord's side. This second faction won out, and the Black Watch volunteered to join MacLeod's regiment in the attack on the Clan Smoke Jaguar homeworld of Huntress. The rise of the Word of Blake and the systems around Terra would end up putting the Northwind Highlanders at significant risk. After the unexpected and suspicious deaths of 4 clan elders, the Highlander regiments exercised their escape clauses in their contracts to return home for elections. However, this was a trap, and the Word of Blake used the opportunity to set up a blockade of the Northwind system, which prevented the Highlanders from acting against them. When a force was sent to Northwind to break the blockade, they found no Blakist forces in the system. The communications infrastructure on Northwind and in orbit above the planet had been disabled, so there was no way for the Highlanders to know that they were no longer under guard. Now able to act, the Northwind Highlanders participated in Operation Scour to rid the Inner Sphere of the Word of Blake wherever it could be found. At one point, they even fought alongside the Ghost Bears, which must have been interesting for the Highlanders who had spent their careers fighting the clans. Eventually, Terra had to be retaken, and the Highlanders were there. The combat drop outside Sydney did not fare well, but ultimately they were successful in taking their objectives and helping to liberate the cradle of humanity. In the following decades, the Highlanders rebuilt their forces and expanded their production capacity on Northwind. As one of the most powerful forces within the Republic of the Sphere, they held influence over training of the Republic armed forces. Eventually, that influence led to an absorption of all but one of the Highlander regiments into the RAF. The 1st Kearney Regiment remained independent to preserve the Highlanders' historical legacy into the future. It seemed that the future of the Northwind Highlanders was inexorably tied to that of the Republic of the Sphere. With the collapse of the HPG network in 3132, the units operating out of Northwind, under the leadership of Countess Tara Campbell, had the daunting task of babysitting the Republic. This sometimes involved fighting off invasions and other times quelling rebellions from planetary leaders who thought they could run things better on their own. It seemed there was no hot spot in the Republic that didn't eventually end up on the plate of the Highlanders. Tara Campbell became incredibly influential as a result, as her star was consistently rising. When the fortress wall went up in October 3135, the 1st Kearney Regiment was within Prefecture 10 and was instrumental in the organization of the region's military units, training, and resupply. When the wall gradually contracted, the Republic was suddenly set upon from all sides. With the goal of claiming Northwind and its intact hyperpulse generator, a Capellan force was hammered by the Highlanders who refused to give ground. Through subterfuge and some luck of circumstance, the Capellan forces eventually fractured and ended up fighting each other after the Highlanders created a ruse to make them think the HPG had been destroyed. Following the Capellan invasion, many of the remaining Highlanders were called to Terra to help defend the Republic of the Sphere from clans Wolf and Jade Falcon. They ended up fighting primarily in Europe against the Jade Falcons. Ultimately, the Highlanders would end up being surrounded and forced to surrender on their ancestral lands of Scotland. Tara Campbell became Alaric Ward's bondsman in exchange for the salvation of the Highlanders. The rest of the Highlanders were allowed to leave Terra following the victory of Clan Wolf over the Republic. Now back on Northwind, the future of the Highlanders is in question following the end of the Republic of the Sphere. For now, they remain independent and are rebuilding their forces. The legacy of the Northwind Highlanders is one built on grit and steadfast determination to build upon long-held traditions. As with other legendary mercenary units, it's more than just making money or building a reputation as being good at breaking stuff. They see a future for humanity beyond the constant bickering and petty wars that have defined so much of human history. We root for the Highlanders because we want to believe that humans can someday find a lasting peace to build across the stars. If you want to know more about the Northwind Highlanders, I would suggest Highlander Gambit and Impetus of War by Blaine Lee Pardoe, Grey Watch Protocol by Michael Saravella, and if you can find it, there is a Highlander sourcebook printed way back in the dark days of 2002, which has the history of the unit, scenarios for playing out important battles from the unit's history, biographies of some of the big names, and rundowns for each of the units within the Highlanders. Catalyst currently doesn't offer it in PDF form, which is a shame. Maybe you can find it somewhere in the future. The Mercenaries Combat Manual does have a brief section on the Highlanders, but not enough to justify the purchase if you're not also interested in some of those other mercenary units in the book as well. Recently released Perception of Victory by Michael Ciravella revisits Northwind in the days of the collapsing Republic of the Sphere. It covers that Capellan invasion of the planet and the Highlanders' valiant defense. It's not an understatement to say that the Northwind Highlanders are a fan favorite. Among the great mercenary units, they reflect so many of the ideals and aspirations toward that eventual peace that we can empathize with today. While my paint scheme is definitely not typical, I wanted to hit upon the unit's flair and give a nod toward their proud history. Let me know what you think. Am I on the mark, or at least near it? Take care. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Big thank you to the Ko-Fi supporters who helped make this video possible. You now go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.